What's up, guys? Justin here with the RenderingEssentials.com, back with another SketchUp and Lumion tutorial for you. So in this video, we're going to take an interior rendering that we created on my SketchUp channel, and we're going to export it into Lumion and set it up to create kind of a photorealistic rendering. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. Alright, so if you remember what we did in the SketchUp videos, we created this interior with different models and everything like that. So we have things like tables and chairs. It's kind of an interior apartment model. What we want to do is we want to export that into Lumion. And before we do that, we want to set up a couple different things. Because if you remember in Lumion, all of the different textures get mapped differently and things like that. So what I want to do in this case is I want to apply a couple different materials in here, just knowing that I'm probably going to adjust them. So in this case, I'm probably going to apply a close to white material to I'm going to apply a close to white material to my HVAC tube over here, and I'm also going to take that and probably put it in its own group or on its own layer, because I'm probably going to turn these furnishings off and actually furnish this with the stuff in Lumion, just because those are higher quality models and the stuff I could just pull out of the 3D warehouse real quickly. I might leave the rug because I might use the Lumion fur in order to make kind of a furrier rug. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, because I've organized everything in here in the outliner, and so what that does is that makes this a little bit easier for me to come in here and make changes. So in this case, I'm just going to take my spiral duct and I'm just going to move that up into the building section rather than the furnishings section. And I'm also going to click on that and make sure that it's on its own layer. So I'm just going to select that, go up into the group, and I'm just going to put that back on the layer 0. So I just want to make sure that when I turn all of my furnishings off, so if I go into my layer section, for example, and I turn off furnishings, I want to make sure that this piece of ductwork is still in there. And so now what we can do is we can export this into Lumion. And I'm going to do that using Live Sync. Oh, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm also going to take this radiator and I'm going to move it out of the furnishings and into the building. And I will talk about keeping your models organized in SketchUp in another video, but this can be really helpful because you can see how easily I can move things back and forth between furnishings and building. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and leave the furnishing on. I'm going to leave the furnishings on for right now, and I'm going to use the Lumion Live Sync in order to export this to Lumion. And so all you need to do when you have that installed is just click the play button. It's going to ask you if you want to start Lumion, and I'm going to go ahead and say yes. And so what that's going to do is that's going to pop up a Lumion box, or the Lumion program, I mean, and you can come in here, and the first thing it's going to ask you is what environment this needs to be in. And so in this case, because this is mostly an interior render, when this pops up, I'm going to select the option for just a white background. So you can see how this pops this up. This is asking you what environment you want to drop this in on. In this case, I'm just going to drop it in on the white background. Depending on what you wanted to do with things around your model, you might do that a little bit differently. But now you'll notice that as soon as you do this, and I'm going to drag my SketchUp model, for now I'll just drag it right here, you'll notice that kind of as a default, this loads up with your camera view in Lumion being linked to your SketchUp view. Now, a lot of the time I try to stop the camera synchronization just because it makes everything run a little bit slow. But you can see how when I do this, my whole model has been brought in and is now ready for editing. So all the different parts and pieces are in here, and you can see how this gets brought in as kind of one singular group, which is why it's all green when I mouse over this. But in this case, you can see how the first thing that really stands out when you do something like this is you look at the models that we pulled down from the 3D warehouse, and they just don't look super great. So you can see how, like, my table doesn't look very good. I'm going to switch us to materials mode. You can see how my table doesn't look super good. My couch doesn't look super realistic. They're just kind of lower polygon than what we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into SketchUp, and I'm going to turn off my furnishings. When I turn off my furnishings, as long as Live Sync is running, you can see how those furnishings turn off over here in Lumion as well. And so now that those have turned off, you can see how we're basically left in here with our radiator, our window, and our building. And so now what we can do is we can start building on top of this. And so there's two things you could do with these materials. You could leave the materials as they are and bring in the maps. So in this case, I would click on this material. Since these are materials that I have from POLIIGON, they have those different maps in here, and I can edit things about that just by clicking on the standard button. And what that allows me to do is that'll allow me to load in a normal map. And so in this case, since this is a material I downloaded from POLIIGON that has maps, I can go in and I can find the map for that brick material. And keeping organized can be really important when you do this so that you can find these. But in this case, all I have to do is go in here and I just have to find the normal map for this brick. So what that's going to do is that's going to affect the way that the light bounces off of these bricks. So you can see how this looks rougher now, and you can kind of adjust. You can adjust how rough this is, and you can adjust how much relief there is based on that normal map. So you can see how as I drag this slider, you can see how you get a little bit more relief in the bumps in here, so the light reflects off of these a different way. So that's one way to do this, is you can import those maps, or you can just use Lumion's material library as well. So you can see how I can come in here and I can just adjust this and find my own wood floor, and I can also come in here and adjust things like the rotation. So I can rotate this one 90 degrees, for example, and use that wood floor instead of the one that I had in there. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to adjust the rest of these default materials really quick, selecting things like metal over here and kind of a rough wood for the ceiling, and then we'll get back to it in just a minute. And so in this case, for the ceiling material, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to keep the material I had and use the map that came with that, just because that's more of a custom, like, rough wood material, and I don't think there's really a good equivalent built into Lumion. And you do have to be a little bit careful with some of these wood materials. You don't really want them to be glossy or super reflective because they're not new or anything like that. So you do have to kind of keep an eye out on that as you do this. All right, and so once we have that in here and we've saved our changes, what we can do is we can start importing different objects to match up in our model. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to import things that are kind of like the stuff that was in our SketchUp model, but we're going to use Lumion's library, which has a lot better, more high detailed models in here, especially when we start dealing with plants and things like that. But we're just going to click over here to objects. We're going to go into place mode and we're going to start adding some things. So, and we're just going to click on this button for place mode, and then we're going to start selecting things from the indoor library. So in this case, I'm going to look for things like couches and tables and chairs. So I could bring in a table, like a kitchen table, to go over off on the right hand side over here. Things like that. And so you can go through and you can search for the different things yourself. Using this library, and just remember, when you bring things in, you can hold the R key in order to rotate things. So you can see I can bring this table in really easily. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to furnish out this model real quick. All right, so one other thing to note is this, is if I go back into edit mode for a second, this carpet that I brought in is actually a model from the SketchUp extension warehouse, and it's just kind of a flat plane with an image on it, but it's being treated as Lumion fur. So if I go in and edit the material on it, so if I select this, you can see how this actually has a fur selected, and you can actually adjust the way that this looks by adjusting the different settings in here. And so one thing to note about this, and I'm going to make a full video on this in a little bit, but for right now, is you can see how this gets brought in with an image, and that image generally, if this map scale is set to anything above 0, doesn't map properly. So in order to get this to map properly, to make this rug look the way that we want it to look, you just have to drag this map scale all the way to the left. You can see how that UV maps the fur material to this point right here. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go into our export settings. And so we've got a fairly lived-in looking space here. There's probably some things I could do to the bookcase or maybe add some drapes or something, but we'll go ahead and leave it as is for right now. We're going to go ahead and click the Save Changes button, and we're just going to go into the Photo Export options. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to set this up. So we're going to set this up. Probably we want to reduce the field of view on something like this. So we could set up a few different kinds of things. I probably need to fix this. I didn't realize this image that I put on the wall was actually a scaled up desktop photo. So I probably need to replace that real quick. So we'll go in and replace that with something like this. And so what we're going to do in this case is we're going to set up our photo, and I'm just going to kind of find an image that I like, something that kind of represents the space a little bit. A lot of the time what you want to do, because you don't necessarily want to pick all of this up, is increase your focal length setting in here, so you're really kind of focused on a couple different things. Just kind of figure out what you want your eye to focus on. In this case, I'm going to leave this kind of on this plant right here and the big picture. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on my styles, and we're going to import a style. And in this case, we're going to go ahead and we're going to import the interior style. So you can see I can click on this and then select the import, and what that's going to do is that's going to set up your settings in here based on that preset. If we were to select something like dawn, this would look a little bit different. If we were to set something up like daytime or something like that, your settings would look a little bit different too. And one thing we didn't really do was set up anything outside of this window. The one thing I am going to try is I'm going to add a real skies effect in here. So I'm just going to go into my effects and go to real skies. And you can use that real sky to adjust kind of where your lighting is coming from. And in this case, I'm going to kind of disguise the fact that I don't have anything in my horizon because I didn't set that up, just by kind of moving my camera around to set up a different view. But you can select these different real skies, and your lighting is going to look a little bit different depending on which one you select. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set this up. I'm going to focus on this big plant in my couch. And you can see how this looks pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and click the button for Store Camera, and that's going to store our settings. I'm not really going to adjust anything else at the moment. I'm just going to click Render Photo, and we're just going to render this and see how it looks. And so you can see how as we render this, this gives us a really great image without having to make a whole bunch of other changes or anything like that. If we wanted to, we might actually reduce or bring the focal length back down a little bit, just so you can kind of see a little bit of the ceiling. In a space like this, kind of that older look is something that sometimes you want, and then we could just render it again. But you can see how that can give us a really great image without having to do a whole lot of setup or change a lot of settings. So that's where I'm going to end this video. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought. Was this helpful to you? Do you like this style of video? I just love having that conversation with you guys. If you like this video, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new rendering content every week. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.